It was supposed to be just another smooth boarding at Terminal 7, Gate A16. First-class passengers were lining up. The gate agent smiled in robotic rhythm, and the murmur of pre-flight chatter floated through the air like a melody no one paid attention to. Then he appeared. Grant Whitmore. Silver hair perfectly sculpted, navy-tailored suit hugging his frame, and a leather duffel bag slung carelessly over his shoulder. The CEO of Whitmore Aviation Systems had made a name not just for his empire, but for the way he walked like the world owed him. That day, he boarded Flight 712 from New York to Zurich with the kind of arrogance only money can afford. "Mr. Whitmore," the flight attendant cooed as she scanned his boarding pass, "your suite is ready, sir." He offered a rehearsed nod, the kind that says, "I don't need to know your name," and stepped onto the jet bridge. Grant was heading to Zurich for a private auction, a discreet gathering of elite investors, hedge fund moguls, and old money aristocrats. But more than the art or antique manuscripts up for bid, Grant had his eye on something else, reclaiming power over a trust he thought he controlled. Because someone unexpected had been listed in the will of the late Sebastian Aldridge, the elusive billionaire and Grant's longtime business partner. The problem? That someone was Grant's ex-wife. He laughed when he first read the executor's note. Not just laughed, mocked, ridiculed, nearly spilled his scotch on the mahogany desk. Catherine Langley, the woman he divorced 10 years ago, was named as a beneficiary in the sealed addendum to Sebastian's estate. The same Catherine he'd left when his IPO went public, and she still believed in late-night takeout and handwritten anniversary cards. The same woman who had walked away from everything without a single demand. Maybe it's just a clerical error, his new wife Blair had offered with a polished smile over brunch the next day. But Grant knew Sebastian too well. There were no errors, only strategy. Now, mid-flight across the Atlantic, Grant leaned back in his seat, sipping champagne and glancing at the manifest he had discreetly requested from the flight purser. And there it was. Langley Catherine. Seat 2A. He turned sharply. She was here, not just mentioned in a document, not just a footnote in a billionaire's legacy. She was literally on his flight, sitting just one suite across from him, separated only by a thin wall of arrogance and regret. His jaw tightened. What game was she playing? He craned his neck subtly. Through the partition he could hear faint jazz coming from her headphones. That was her, all right? Same quiet taste, same composed silence. But something was different. Catherine was no longer the woman in worn-out jeans and bookstore loyalty cards. She wore a soft cashmere sweater the color of fog and had an aura of calm, as if turbulence didn't faze her. As if she was perfectly aware of who she was and who she was becoming. Grant stared at the ice in his glass. There was a reason she was on this flight. There always was. She never did anything by accident. And so began a flight where no one knew that two ex-lovers, once torn apart by betrayal and power games, were now seated in a cabin built for the elite, preparing for a silent war that would unfold not in a courtroom or a boardroom, but 35,000 feet in the air. And just 2 rows behind them, in economy, sat a young woman named Lily, with curious eyes and a birthmark just like Grant's. But no one noticed her yet. Not yet. Catherine Langley didn't need a glass of champagne to feel powerful, not anymore. As the plane sliced through the early evening sky, she sat in seat 2A, legs crossed, calm as a sleeping sea, her gaze fixed on the window. Somewhere between clouds and constellations, her thoughts drifted to Zurich. To Sebastian. To the sealed letter she'd received last week with his signature in blue ink and a sentence that had pulled the ground from under her feet. "You always had more honor than the rest of us. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." She had read it 3 times before folding it gently and placing it back into its envelope. It was not a reconciliation. It was a confession. One that came too late, or maybe just in time. Across the aisle, behind a thin wall of first-class privacy, Grant Whitmore was losing composure by the minute. He kept glancing toward her suite, as if trying to decipher her expression through soundproof walls. Catherine didn't flinch. She knew the man too well. The more still she remained, the more he unraveled. "You haven't changed at all, Grant," she thought, her lips twitching with the ghost of a smile. Except he had. His face had a stiffness now, a permanent scowl carved by ambition, deals, and whatever it cost him to stay on top. Catherine had once loved that drive, until it ran over everything that made her feel seen. A soft chime broke the silence as the purser appeared with an envelope. "Miss Langley, this was handed to me by someone at the gate. Said it was for your eyes only." Catherine accepted the envelope calmly. She didn't need to open it to know who had sent it. Sebastian's seal was embossed in gold. Inside was a single page. A note. "He doesn't know. Not about Zurich, not about her. You'll need strength, Catherine, but you've always had more of that than the rest of us combined." Her fingers trembled slightly at the last line. Not about her. She slid the letter back into her purse, heart racing beneath layers of quiet dignity. In economy, Lily shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her mother had told her to stay invisible on this flight. No noise, no drama. Eyes down. "We're just here for the opportunity, not the attention," she had whispered back in the terminal. But now, Lily couldn't help but glance toward the front of the plane, toward the luxurious curtain that separated worlds. Something felt familiar. The man who had boarded right before them. The woman who looked like the portrait in her mother's bedroom. She didn't understand why her chest was tightening, why her palms were sweaty, but the truth was starting to itch beneath her skin. In first class, Grant finally stood, his champagne untouched. He walked the narrow aisle between suites, slowing as he passed seat 2A. Catherine didn't look up, she didn't need to. "Didn't expect to see you here," Grant said flatly. She kept her eyes on her Kindle. "Life's full of turbulence, Grant." A flicker of irritation crossed his face. "We should talk. About Zurich, about the will." Now she looked up, slowly, deliberately. "I think everything that needed to be said was already said, Grant. 10 years ago." The words hung between them, heavy and sharp. "You know he was senile near the end," he tried. "You were always good at exploiting emotion." That stung, but she didn't let it show. "And you were always good at projecting guilt onto everyone but yourself." He took a step back, visibly rattled. "This isn't over." "I didn't say it was," she replied. Back in economy, Lily looked out the window, trying to quiet the storm brewing inside her. The woman in 2A, she knew her. Not from tabloids or business news, from home, from the letter hidden in a shoebox under her bed. The one her mother had written years ago but never mailed. The one addressed to a woman named Catherine Langley. Lily clutched her pendant, heart racing. She didn't know what was waiting in Zurich. But something told her it was the beginning of everything. At cruising altitude, the aircraft glided like a quiet secret across the Atlantic, but inside, the tension crackled like static in the cabin air. Catherine leaned back in her seat, fingers loosely interlocked as the flight attendant gently cleared her dinner tray. "Would you like dessert, Miss Langley?" She smiled faintly. "No, thank you. Just tea. Jasmine, if you have it." As the attendant walked away, Catherine's eyes drifted toward the velvet curtain at the end of the first-class cabin, the symbolic barrier between privilege and everything else. It had never felt so literal. Beyond that curtain sat a girl, a teenage girl with hazel eyes and posture that reminded Catherine of herself when she was 17. Quiet but observant, restrained but burning inside. She hadn't been told specifics, but she could feel it. Zurich. Sebastian hadn't just written to soothe guilt. He'd passed on a torch, a truth, and truths never travel alone. Just then, turbulence rocked the plane. The captain's voice crackled overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a bit of unexpected weather over the Atlantic. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We'll do everything to ensure a smooth ride." The cabin dimmed slightly as night fell deeper outside. Back in row 26, Lily pressed her forehead against the window. The moonlight flickered over ocean clouds below, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Her mother sat beside her, gently rubbing her back. "You okay?" her mother whispered. Lily nodded, but her voice was shaky. "That woman, in first class, do you know her?" Her mother froze, not visibly, but the pause was long enough. "Just someone your father once worked with," she said softly. "Why?" Lily hesitated. "She looks like the picture." "What picture?" "In the shoebox, the one you keep hidden." Silence. Then her mother looked her in the eye, full of pain and honesty. "She's your Aunt Lily, your father's sister." Lily's heart pounded. "So she's Sebastian Callahan's daughter?" A nod. Lily turned away, staring out at the clouds that now felt like mountains. Suddenly, the intercom buzzed again, this time a different voice. "Mr. Grant Whitmore, please return to your seat. We are expecting moderate turbulence ahead." But Grant didn't move. He stood near the lavatory, phone in hand, his voice hushed but venomous. "No, listen to me. If the will stands as it is, we're talking about a full restructure. Catherine Langley has no legal claim unless she discloses the Zurich assets. I want you to prepare an injunction, yes, before we land." The nearby attendant politely approached. "Sir, I need you to return to your seat. The captain has activated the fasten seatbelt sign." Grant lowered the phone and flashed a forced smile. Of course. But the smile vanished the moment he turned back toward his seat, because standing in the aisle now, as if summoned by fate, was Lily. "Mr. Whitmore," she said quietly. He blinked. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" "I think you knew my grandfather," she replied. The words struck him like a slap. He looked at her again, closer this time. The eyes, the cheekbones, something familiar. "What's your name?" he demanded. Lily Clark." He paled. "Who's your mother?" Before Lily could answer, a firm voice came from behind. "Enough." Catherine had stepped into the aisle. Not with anger, but with a force no one could ignore. "She's not a bargaining chip, Grant. She's not a loophole in your ambition." Lily turned, startled. "You know who I am?" Catherine's eyes softened. "I've known since the moment I saw you." A breath, a pause. Then, "Welcome aboard, Lily. We have a lot to talk about." For a few long seconds, the aisle stood still, like a moment suspended in air, untouched by the turbulence rocking the fuselage. Passengers craned their necks. The flight attendants exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to intervene. But in that hush between two beating hearts, Catherine's and Lily's, something shifted. A truth no longer buried, a bond no longer denied. Grant Whitmore's voice cut the moment like a knife. "This is absurd," he muttered, forcing a chuckle. "You're not really going to do this here, in the middle of a transatlantic flight?" Catherine turned her eyes to him, calm, controlled, but no longer silent. "Yes, Grant, here now, because I'm tired of letting people like you decide when the truth is convenient." Lily looked between them, her breath shallow. Her mother had risen from her seat now, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Catherine," she said carefully, "this isn't the place." But Catherine raised a hand, not to silence her, just to ask for trust. "I've spent 15 years letting people tell me when to speak," she said, now addressing the entire first-class cabin. 15 years of silence, obedience, and being dismissed as nothing more than Sebastian's discarded mistake. A collective breath filled the room. "But Sebastian Callahan didn't discard me," she continued. "He raised me to fight, and even when he didn't always do right by me, he tried to make it right in the end. He left me with the one thing Grant has always feared, the truth." A low voice came from Lily's mother. "Karen, why now?" Catherine's voice trembled slightly. "Because your daughter deserves to know where she comes from, and what she's inherited." Lily blinked. "Inherited?" Catherine stepped forward, reaching into her purse and pulling out a slim, dark envelope. Sebastian's final letter. "I wasn't the only one he left something to," she said. "He didn't just write you into his will as an afterthought, Lily. He wrote you into it because he loved you, because he watched you grow from afar, and because, in many ways, you're more his legacy than either of us." Lily took the envelope, hands shaking. Inside, a handwritten letter, and a second, smaller envelope addressed to Zurich Holdings, minor beneficiary portfolio. Grant moved forward, furious. "This is insane. This letter proves nothing. Anyone could have forged." He didn't get to finish, because just then the captain's voice returned overhead. Urgent this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats immediately. We're approaching a pressure front. Cabin crew, secure the cabin." The plane jolted hard to the left. Overhead bins rattled. Someone gasped audibly. Catherine grabbed the nearest seat back. Lily stumbled into her mother's arms. Grant fell back, nearly toppling into an attendant. For a second, everyone forgot about wills, legacies, and family secrets. Survival took center stage. Back in her seat, Catherine buckled in and turned toward the window. Rain streaked the glass like tears, illuminated by distant lightning. She thought about how her life had been one long storm. Illegitimacy, shame, being kept in the shadows by men like Sebastian, who claimed to love but feared the consequences of acknowledgement, and men like Grant, who built empires on silence. But this moment, This chaos was oddly freeing. Next to her, Lily sat in stunned silence, holding the letter like a lifeline. She didn't cry, she didn't speak, she just stared at Catherine. "You're really my aunt," she whispered, barely audible over the roar outside. Catherine nodded. "I'm sorry it took me this long to be worthy of that title." Lily didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. That was enough for now. As the plane leveled out and the turbulence softened to a distant hum, one final announcement came from the cockpit. "We'll be beginning our descent into New York shortly. Thank you for your patience." Catherine let out a slow breath. She knew what waited on the ground: lawyers, press, a boardroom full of men who would rather see her buried than bold. But for the first time, she had an ally. A girl with her brother's eyes and her own quiet fire. And that was a beginning. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the pilot announced final approach, but inside first class, the atmosphere remained thick with questions. Grant sat rigid in his seat, fists clenched, eyes staring straight ahead. The carefully curated world he built of influence, image, and inheritance was beginning to unravel, and not quietly. The worst part? He had underestimated Catherine. Again. Across the aisle, Lily hadn't let go of the envelope. Her fingers traced the edge of her father's letter as if memorizing every crease. Beside her, Karen sat in stunned silence, still absorbing the tidal wave of revelation that had swept over them in the last hour. "You okay?" Catherine asked gently. Lily nodded slowly. "I just don't know what this means." "It means you get to choose," Catherine said softly. "Choose what kind of legacy you want to carry. What kind of woman you want to become. It doesn't have to be his version." Lily turned to her. "But what about you? Why now? Why this flight?" Catherine looked down at her hands, the faintest tremor betraying the storm still within her. "Because this was the last place he and I spoke before he died. In this very cabin, 4 months ago, and because I knew you'd be on this flight." That caught Karen's attention. "How?" Catherine hesitated, then met her gaze with quiet honesty. "Sebastian told me. He planned it. Booked the seat next to you weeks in advance. He said it was time I stopped running, time you started knowing." Karen looked as though someone had knocked the breath out of her. "You mean this wasn't a coincidence?" "No," Catherine said. "It was his final move." Grant scoffed loudly from across the aisle. Typical Sebastian, manipulative to the grave. Catherine didn't rise to the bait. She simply said, "No, Grant. He finally chose courage over control." The cabin grew quiet again as passengers prepared for landing. But inside that first-class section, something had changed. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was reverent. Like the end of an old act and the curtain slowly lifting on a new one. Lily finally broke it. "What happens next?" Catherine took a deep breath. "The reading of the will, the transfer of power. There'll be press, there'll be questions, and there'll be people who try to silence you." Lily raised her eyebrows. "Me?" Catherine nodded. "You're the last name on that list, Lily. The one no one expected. That makes you dangerous." Grant leaned in now, his voice low and cold. "You're manipulating her." Karen turned sharply to him. "She's done more in 1 hour to show this girl love than you have in 16 years. Grant's face flushed with fury, but before he could respond, the plane dipped, signaling final descent. Seatbelts clicked, trays secured, and outside, the flickering lights of New York grew closer. As they touched down with a soft but powerful thud, Catherine whispered to herself, "You did it, old man. You forced us all to land, together." The aircraft rolled toward the gate. But the drama wasn't over. Because waiting on the tarmac, behind a line of tinted sedans and suited officials, stood 2 attorneys from Whitmore Callahan Holdings, a notary public, and a man holding a silver briefcase. Catherine smiled. "Looks like the will gets read sooner than expected." Lily's eyes widened. "Here, at the airport?" Catherine grinned. Sebastian loved a good stage. The seatbelt sign clicked off. The doors opened. Passengers began to disembark, murmuring about the strange energy in first class. But Catherine, Lily, Karen, and a visibly pale Grant remained in their seats until a uniformed airline attendant stepped in. "Miss Bennett? Miss Whitmore? Mr. Whitmore? You're requested in the VVIP lounge. Follow me, please." Catherine stood, straightened her blazer, and reached for her handbag. But before she walked out, she turned to Lily and extended her hand. "You ready?" Lily paused, looked at her mother, then her father. Finally, she took Catherine's hand. And together, they walked down that jet bridge, not as strangers anymore, but as something far more dangerous to men like Grant. Allies. The VVIP lounge at Kennedy International was unlike any space most passengers ever saw. High ceilings, mahogany panels, frosted glass walls, and at its center an obsidian conference table that seemed to absorb sound and light alike. That's where Catherine, Lily, Karen, and Grant now stood, each in their own storm. Waiting beside the table were three individuals. A tall man in a tailored navy suit, Michael Lang, Sebastian Callahan's longtime attorney, a notary public, short and efficient-looking, with a leather-bound ledger, and a security agent holding a silver briefcase handcuffed to his wrist. Michael Lang greeted them with a nod. "Thank you for coming." Mr. Callahan was unorthodox in his timing, but adamant in his instructions. He gestured to the seats. Catherine remained standing. "Let's get to it." Michael unlocked the briefcase, retrieved a sealed brown envelope, and handed it to the notary. Then he pulled out a thick black folder labeled SC Final Directive Flight 1471. Grant scoffed. Even in death, the old man has to be theatrical. Michael didn't look up. "You'll find he had good reason." He flipped open the folder. Sebastian Callahan amended his will exactly 3 weeks before his death. This is the version that now holds legal weight. Witnessed, notarized, digitally recorded, will begin with his preamble. He pressed a small remote. A flat screen lit up, and there he was. Sebastian Callahan, recorded from what looked like his personal study, dressed in his signature vest and tie, eyes tired but resolute. "If you're hearing this, I'm dead, and if I'm dead, that means I ran out of time to fix everything myself, so I'm handing you the mess. Catherine, Grant, Lily, Karen, I owe all of you more than I gave." The room went still. Lily leaned forward. "Catherine, what I did to you was cowardice. I let Grant smear your name. I let the company rewrite you out of the narrative, even when I knew you were the only one in the room who ever dared to tell me the truth. I called it betrayal. It was actually love." Catherine blinked hard. Her jaw clenched, but her shoulders relaxed for the first time. Sebastian continued. "Lily, if the world ever tries to convince you that your blood defines your worth, remind them who your mother is, and who chose you." A tear rolled down Lily's cheek. "Grant, I gave you too much power, and not enough guidance. You played the game, but you forgot the people. That ends today." Grant's lip curled. "He's not even cold, and he's monologuing." Michael cut him off. "Let's move to the legal directives." He pulled a set of documents from the folder. Effective immediately, Sebastian Callahan's shares in Whitmore Callahan Holdings, comprising 51% of voting power, are transferred to Lily Whitmore. The room exploded. Grant shot up. "This is insane. She's 17. Michael remained calm. "A trust structure has been created. Until Lily turns 25, all voting decisions will be co-executed by two parties, Catherine Whitmore and Karen Hale." Karen gasped. Lily sat frozen. I don't understand." Michael turned to her. "You now hold majority control of one of the most powerful private aviation, security, and biotech portfolios in the United States. Your name is on every board, and your decisions, starting now, will shape the legacy of Sebastian Callahan." Grant's voice cracked. "You can't be serious. She doesn't know the first thing about corporate governance." Michael looked at him, stone-faced. "Neither did you when you took your first seat, Grant. You were handed power. Lily was chosen." Karen stood, stepping between her daughter and her ex-husband. "If you so much as speak to her with that tone again, Grant, I'll have security escort you to a commercial gate." "Is this a joke?" he hissed. "This is war." Catherine finally rose. "No, Grant, this is justice." She walked over to Lily, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "I know it's overwhelming," she said softly, "but you're not alone, and you don't have to be anyone but yourself." Lily's voice wavered. "I don't even know what that means." Karen spoke up. "It means you have a say, something I never did." Michael closed the folder. "There's one final note." He handed Lily a handwritten envelope. Just her name, scrawled in Sebastian's unmistakable script. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, in black ink, were just 6 words. "Be better than all of us." She read it aloud, and somehow the room felt lighter. No more secrets, just truth, just legacy. And for the first time, choice. Outside the VVIP lounge, chaos had begun to stir. The press hadn't been invited, but whispers travel fast in airports. And when those whispers included the words Sebastian Callahan, inheritance, and airline control shakeup, the response was inevitable. By the time Lily, Catherine, and Karen stepped out into the concourse, cameras were already flashing beyond the frosted glass. Phones were up, security details scrambled, and Grant? He was already on the phone, voice low and seething. "She's 17, Walter. There has to be a clause, no minor controls Callahan security. I don't care what he signed, find me leverage." He turned and caught sight of them. Catherine with her steady stride, Karen beside her, shielding Lily from the flashes. And in that moment, his eyes locked on Lily. Not the awkward teen he'd ignored for years, but the girl now holding the keys to his kingdom. He smiled. But it wasn't kind. Outside gate C-27, an unscheduled press conference had started forming. Michael Lang had tried to delay it. Karen preferred silence. But Catherine knew the truth. The only way to stay ahead of the narrative was to own it. She stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, voice clear. "You want a story? Here it is." Dozens of heads turned. Reporters stopped mid-sentence. "I was once married to Sebastian Callahan. I worked beside him. I challenged him, and when I refused to play the game his way, I was exiled from his board and his legacy. Today, that legacy has been rewritten." She stepped aside, revealing Lily, who stood between her and Karen. "This is Lily Whitmore. She is Sebastian's granddaughter, and as of this morning, she holds majority control of his empire." Gasps. Phones lifted higher. "She is young, but she's not naive, and she's not alone." A reporter shouted, "Miss Whitmore, what will you do first?" Lily's voice was quiet, but clear. "I'll listen to people, to reason, to truth. Something my grandfather once forgot." Another reporter pushed in. "Do you plan to fire Grant Whitmore?" Lily paused. "I plan to rebuild the company from its foundations. Whoever isn't part of that vision will find the door themselves." The crowd murmured. Grant, standing behind the security barrier, clenched his jaw. But he didn't step forward. Not yet. He had a better plan. An hour later, a sleek black jet with the Callahan crest began taxiing toward the executive hangar. Grant was already on board. His destination? Zurich. Inside his briefcase, duplicates of legal agreements, encrypted USBs, and a non-disclosure contract signed by Sebastian Callahan 2 years ago. A contingency, or so Grant believed. He glanced at his assistant, Julian, nervous, pale. "She's going to destroy everything," Julian said. "That kid in her PR circus. The board's panicking." Grant smirked. "Let them panic. We'll be in Switzerland before their press hits the wires." But just as the engines roared, the door opened, and airport police stepped aboard. "Mr. Grant Whitmore?" He raised an eyebrow. "Yes?" One officer stepped forward. "We've received an executive injunction. You're not cleared to leave U.S. airspace. Please disembark the plane." Grant laughed. "You have no jurisdiction. This is a private." Filed by Whitmore Callahan Holdings under Emergency Corporate Safeguard Protocol. Your voting rights are suspended pending investigation, and your international departure? Blocked. From behind the officers, Catherine appeared. In heels, calm, unshakable. "I thought I'd see you off personally, Grant." His face twisted. "This is abuse of power." "No," she said. "This is consequence." She held up a document bearing the Callahan seal, signed by Sebastian himself. "In the event of hostile action, your shares are frozen, pending review by the Ethics Committee." "You forged that." "No, I just never burned what you thought was buried." Grant's breath caught. He looked down at his briefcase, at the empire he thought he still controlled, and for the first time, he looked small. The officers motioned. "Sir?" He stood. But before he exited, he turned to Catherine. "You think this changes anything? That girl doesn't have what it takes. You'll destroy everything he built." Catherine didn't blink. She's not here to protect his legacy. She's here to rewrite it. Back in the airport's upper suite, Lily sat by the window, watching Grant's jet get towed back to hangar. Karen handed her a cup of tea. "You didn't flinch," Karen said. Lily looked down at the steam. I wanted to cry or run, but I kept hearing his voice. "Your grandfather's? No, yours." Saying I didn't have to be perfect, just brave. Karen smiled, the kind of smile that comes with years of silence finally breaking. "You were both." Legacy at 40,000 feet. 2 days later, the world watched live from over 40 countries. Lily Whitmore, 17 years old, soft-spoken, unprepared by every conventional standard, stood before a sea of flashing cameras, flanked by Karen and Catherine, ready to deliver her first official address as majority shareholder of Callahan Holdings, from a private jet turned press stage cruising at 40,000 feet. Yes, she chose the sky. Because up here, above borders, banks, and boardrooms, her grandfather had once said, "Power feels clean." Now Lily intended to change what power felt like entirely. "My name is Lily Whitmore," she began, voice steady despite the cabin's quiet hum. "And up until a week ago, I thought I was just a girl trying to survive high school, being raised by two women the world never gave credit." She turned to glance at Karen, who nodded quietly, and Catherine, standing tall like a lighthouse in a storm. "I found out who I really am on a runway." There were no cue cards, just truth. "I am the granddaughter of Sebastian Callahan, a man whose genius reshaped global travel and whose silence buried too many voices beneath it." Gasps. The press held their breath. "And I'm also the daughter of the woman he discredited, the woman who built him, who bled for him, and whom he left with nothing but a child and a silence he hoped would never speak." She looked up, right into the camera. "I'm here to speak now." In Zurich, Grant Whitmore watched the live stream in a glass conference room with 3 lawyers and no appetite. His phone buzzed every 30 seconds with headlines. "The sky has a new heir." "Lily Whitmore promises audit of entire board." "Karen Callahan confirmed as strategic advisor." Everywhere he turned, the house of cards trembled. And then came the moment he feared most. "As of this moment," Lily said, "I am issuing a full executive review of all Callahan subsidiaries. I am freezing all international assets pending third-party investigation. And I am dismantling the private equity arms my grandfather once used to silence whistleblowers and undermine employees." Murmurs turned to gasps. Some investors called it suicide. Others, genius. And to the employees watching, those in the sky, on the ground, in uniforms and at terminals, I want to say, this company is no longer a fortress, it's a community. She paused, heart thudding. "I am young. I will make mistakes, but I will never again allow a man like Grant Whitmore to define what legacy means in this family, or in this sky." The plane began to descend into New York. Catherine placed a hand on Lily's shoulder. Karen, ever the calm, simply whispered, "He'd be proud. Not for what you said, but for who you became saying it." Tears welled in Lily's eyes. She wasn't sure if she believed it, but she had spoken, and the world had listened, and now came the choice no one could make for her. Hours later, inside the newly named Callahan Commons, a reimagined global HQ built on transparency and equity, the board waited. Grant Whitmore had been stripped of all titles, but Catherine held something in her hand, a private letter, unopened, sealed in Sebastian's final days. She gave it to Lily. Inside, 2 things: a handwritten apology, and 1 sentence: "Legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's who you leave it with." Lily folded the letter and looked out the glass wall facing the tarmac. "Do we rebuild?" Karen asked softly. Lily didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, firmly, "No." Karen raised an eyebrow. "We reimagine." 6 months later, the world knew Callahan Air not as the fortress of an old empire, but as the first major airline to open every leadership position to public vetting, to invest 30% of annual profit in workforce equity, and to turn the VIP lounge into a public storytelling space for every kind of traveler. Catherine returned to the board, on her terms. Karen trained the next generation of women leaders. And Lily? She earned her pilot's license on her 18th birthday. But even before that, on her very first solo flight, she turned on the intercom, smiled, and said, "This is your captain speaking. The skies are open, and so are we." If this story moved you, share it. If you believe legacy should be earned, not inherited, comment below. And if you know someone who's quietly building courage, tag them. Because sometimes, the most powerful revolutions begin at cruising altitude.